Well, guys, it's that time of year again to start talking about the worst films of 2018. 2018 has been a pretty mixed bag of a year, honestly. There's been some really good films that have come out, some great films even, but a lot of disappointments have come out this year and just straight up bad films that are some of the worst. And that's really sad. Of the 124 films that I have seen this year, 54 of them were in the range of a 5 or 1 out of 10. That is really sad. That's almost half the movies I've seen this year. That's really sad, and hopefully 2019 can show that we have more movies that will be good or great or even just okay. But I hope we don't get another year like this. This has been very disappointing, a very dry year with every now and then a good movie coming out, but it's honestly few and far between. Now, as usual, of the 124 films I've seen, there's definitely more that came out this year that I didn't get a chance to see. There's some bad films that might appear on other people's list, and some of them I might not have seen or just thought didn't make the cut for this list. So, just saying that up front. So these choices might not be your own, but they are my personal worst films of this year. So before we get started, I want to talk about some dishonorable mentions. Kirk Cameron Connect, The Hurricane Heist, Action Point, A Wrinkle in Time, Truth or Dare, and Life of the Party. Congratulations to those 6 films. You did not make the top 10 worst of this year. Congratulations. Although you were mentioned in this video, which means you're pretty bad, so you could have easily been on this list. So anyway, with that said, let's get started with the number 10 spot on the worst films of 2018. Acrimony was a terrible film that came out this year from the mind of Tyler Perry. It tried to be a thriller type film, Lifetime production, and it just fell flat on its face. And it's just a terribly written film from beginning to end with awkward moments, some moments of pure hilarity. This film is honestly hilarious when it tries to be serious, and it's a really fun time. And that's honestly why it's so high on this list, because honestly, I had a lot of fun with this film. In fact, I almost didn't even put it on this list. But you know what? Of the films that I mentioned before, this one's a worst made film, so it makes sense. And besides, I got it on Blu-ray. This is my guilty pleasure of the year, so I can't put it too low. Next, we have Gotti. Oh, Gotti, Gotti, Gotti. This was a terrible biopic from John Travolta, and man, this could have been a really good introspective type film, a character study of the real life person, but it fails in so many ways. From the editing to the screenwriting to the terrible acting, especially from John Travolta, who gives a terrible New York accent, and it's just laughable at times, and it's honestly a really funny film, and it's not trying to be at all. Everything about this film was misguided, from the directing to even the score by Pitbull. The music is out of place in this film, and everything just feels wrong about this film. Like you're watching some weird experiment, and it's just going completely wrong. Gotti is one of the worst films of the year, but it's only this far down the list because, honestly, it's an extremely entertaining film if you're looking for a good, bad film to watch. So that's why it takes the number 9 spot. 50 Shades Freed. Finally, we are at the end of this terrible trilogy of films, and it feels so good to be done with this. I hope we're done with this. I hope they don't somehow make another one if they want to, but this is a terrible film. But honestly, much like Acrimony and Gotti, I had a blast watching this film. This was a terrible, awful, abysmal film. However, it was laughably bad in a lot of places. I had a lot of fun watching this with a couple of friends. We went to the theater and were joking around with a lot of the stuff happening in the film. And honestly, this film could be lower on my list. It could be lower. It could be number one, honestly. However, I don't think it's as bad as that second one. That was a terrible film, and this is honestly pretty entertaining for a bad film. However, it does have some stuff that I absolutely hate, and that's one of the reasons why it's on this list, such as where it talks about the foster care system and how if you're a foster kid and you don't go into a good family, you're going to become a serial killer, and that's awful. That's a horrible thing to say, and I hated this film even when I enjoyed it. Now we have Unfriended Darkweb. This is the end on my list of what I would say are the good bad films. This is a terrible film from beginning to end. It's lazy, it's contrived, it's bland, it's terribly acted, written, and straight up just boring at times. It's really a sight to behold. I don't know what the first Unfriended was like, but this one was pretty bad in a lot of respects, and honestly, I did find a little bit of it to be entertaining at some points, but honestly, it's just filled with terrible characters. I don't care about any of these people, and I feel bad for the actors. I'm sure they're good people, but this was a terrible film to sit through. It was funny at times when some really stupid stuff happened, but that was few and far between. I don't know why this film exists because it's just a terrible film and a terrible found footage film. Honestly, I think this gimmick in terms of horror has seen the end of it. I don't know how much farther you can go with this premise in terms of the horror genre. We had something this year like Searching, which developed this type of filmmaking into something very interesting, and this film just fails. The first Purge, I have never seen any of the Purge films. I don't care now. I've finally seen this one, and this is all I could take. This is a terrible film. It's boring, it's dull, and it's poorly written. Honestly, it tries to have this type of social commentary with it, but it's poorly conceived, and the rules of the world that this film takes place in do not make any sense, and they don't try to make anything make sense, and it's poorly conceived. It's definitely riding on the coattails of the 2016 election, and it's trying to do something there, trying to say something there, but it fails. And this is a terrible film with some terrible acting, just an ugly film to look at, and honestly, I didn't like this film at all. This film wasn't even entertaining, it was just abysmal and bad. The 1517 to Paris. Clint Eastwood, what happened? This was one of the worst Clint Eastwood films I've ever seen. This is the worst Clint Eastwood film I've ever seen, and I don't know what happened. This is a bland, boring, just stale looking film that doesn't look like it was made by somebody like Clint Eastwood, who definitely has a particular style to him. This film has no style at all, and it's boring, and the story is interesting about these boys that saved people on a train from a terrorist attack. However, that's only the last 5 minutes of the film where it is sort of engaging. However, the rest of the film is padded out with just boring stuff, terrible dialogue, and it doesn't help that the actors playing these real-life people are the real-life people, and they are not actors. I feel terrible for them. I mean, they can't help it that they're bad actors, but honestly, why would you put them in the film? It just makes everything terrible. It drags the film down, and this was one of the first films I saw at the beginning of this year, and it's a film that I keep going back to as like, yeah, that was one of the worst films I have seen this year, and that's why it's on this list. Show Dogs. This film could easily be number one. In fact, many of these could easily be number one, but this film is a train wreck. It's absolutely terrible. Might possibly be the worst Raja Gosnell film that I've seen. This is a lazy attempt at comedy, spy, action thriller. You have dogs, talking dogs with really bad lip movements. You have Will Arnett that's just kind of there. I don't know why he's in this film. I don't know why he signed up for this. This is a terrible film. It's just stupid in so many ways. It just made me so mad watching it, and honestly, it's completely just a bore fest. This is one of the worst children's films I've seen this year. In fact, it probably is in terms of live action, but this was a terrible film to sit through, one of the worst of the year. Sherlock Gnomes. In case you wanted a sequel to Gnomeo and Juliet, here's Sherlock Gnomes, the film nobody asked for, and honestly a film that quickly just disappeared. I don't hear anyone talking about this film anymore. This is a terrible animated film, the worst animated film of this year that I saw, and it's just a lazy put together film with okay actors just spouting terrible dialogue. The animation, although it's alright and everything, it's just watered down and ugly at times. It's not that bright and colorful, and it's just a lazy film with so many gnome puns that it'll drive you absolutely insane. I hated this film, and honestly, when it was over, I was so glad. I was so glad. This was definitely one of the worst films I've seen this year. I hated it from beginning to end. It was annoying, and this definitely is the worst children's film of this year. I mean, in terms of animation, live action, it's absolutely terrible. And the first Gnomeo and Juliet film wasn't that good. However, it had an energy to it that this one didn't have. This one is just pure lazy. Slender Man. This film could be considered one of the so bad it's good type films of the year. However, there's one thing that this film does that puts it this high on the list, and that is that it is an unfinished disaster of a film. This film is absolutely ugly, boring, terrible. Everything you can say about this film in terms of being bad, it is. This is a film that came way too late after the Slender Man craze that appeared on, forums and video games and art and all this stuff. However, this film is just a train wreck from beginning to end, with so many scenes just straight up missing to the point where the film doesn't even have a structure anymore. There's no first act, second act, and third act. There are just scenes that are happening one after the other, and that's the worst thing a film can do. If it has no structure, then you're completely lost during this film. There are scenes that lead nowhere. The film is just absolutely ugly and boring looking. It's just brown and black the whole time. Just, there's no color in this film. The acting is terrible from Joey King, which, man, I feel sorry for her. She needs to get a better agent to put her in some good films, because this is a terrible film. It's not scary. It's honestly hilarious. There were moments when I saw this in the theater where I was bursting out laughing, and people were leaving the theater. I've never seen so many people leave a theater for a film before. This was absolutely awful, if not a little bit entertaining, honestly. However, it's just the fact that this is an unfinished film and just a disaster to watch that puts it this low for me. Death of a Nation. Of course, this was going to be my number one worst film. This is a terrible documentary from Dinesh D'Souza, who is basically making a propaganda piece that tries to say it's a documentary with very little documentary footage, in fact, none at all. It has a message of trying to say that Trump is like Abraham Lincoln when they are completely on opposite ends. He tries to connect slavery with the Democratic Party. He tries to say that Nazis and the Democratic Party are very similar. Honestly, this is just a big love letter to Trump because Dinesh D'Souza was pardoned by Trump. And this film is just terrible. There's nothing interesting in it. It doesn't tell you anything new that you couldn't just look up on Wikipedia. And it cherry picks history to tell a story that is completely false and just tries to sway people one way. I hate films like this because they get very political. I honestly do not like to get political, but when you're getting your facts wrong, that's what really annoys me, and this film is just doing this to spread hate, just make people tear each other apart when we should be just uniting. And this is absolutely, definitely the worst film I have seen this year. In fact, it got a 1 out of 10 from me, which makes it one of the worst films I have seen this year and ever. And guys, that was my top 10 worst films of 2018. That's my own personal list. You can disagree with me, or you can agree with some of the choices I made. We're all different, so that's okay. But honestly, this was kind of a hard list to do because as I was looking at my list, I kept switching and changing different stuff because I was like, maybe thoughts have changed on this film or not. But that's all I've got for you guys, so look back on the channel soon as I talk about my favorite films of this year, which is a better list to end the year on. So that's all I've got for you guys, so as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next review.